G'day, g'day, wherever you are in this multiverse. Welcome to Mastering Music, Mastering Life for another episode. Tony Jack the Bear Man's here, live in full effect here in Melbourne, my beautiful hometown. And today I'm so happy to have on my podcast a gentleman who I had the pleasure of meeting late last year, mastering some mixes he's done for a local artist of ours, Anita Spring. And we got on like a house on fire. I said, dude, we got to do a podcast, because we were just chatting away like there was no tomorrow. And I said, look, this is perfect. It's exactly the kind of conversations I like to have with people. So I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Pete Keppler from New York, New York.
Howdy, howdy.
G'day, mate. How are you? Howdy,
Really
howdy,
good.
howdy, howdy for the Texans, man. That's not typically New York.
I got some southern roots in me somewhere.
You know, isn't it true that they say that hello in New York is fuck you, and in LA, fuck you is hello? No, fuck you, hello is in New York. Isn't that right? Fuck you.
I don't subscribe to all the New Yorkisms, but yeah, it's a little rougher around the edges than where I grew up originally in Massachusetts. So.
In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, how come? I don't know. Maybe you do. Why is it that Massachusetts was declared a Commonwealth?
Oh man,
does that something to do with British history?
Like this. I fail miserably when it comes to history and stuff like that. I know more about the history of New York City than I do about my own hometown or the state that I came from. So.
It's a great city, though, isn't it?
New York is amazing. Somebody dared me into moving here. Almost 30 years ago now, and told me I would never make it. That was all the incentive I needed.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? There's nothing quite like a little bit of the old "fuck you, I'll show you" to drive you. I think so long as it doesn't consume you, a little bit of that goes a long way. And New York's a town that will harden you. It is. It'll spit you. It'll chew you up and spit you out. There's no mercy shown in that place.
No, the precise words used to me by the guy who said I would never make it. Because he had himself attempted to make a living here and came back to the Pioneer Valley where we both grew up. And when I mentioned to him and said that I was interested in moving to New York, he was, "You'll never make it. New York's going to chew you up and spit you out." And I said, well, if I can last there a couple of years, that'll be enough of a fuck you to my buddy. But it was really the best thing that ever happened to me. And it took a little. I've always been somewhat anti-authoritarian and also prone to doing what you tell me not to.
Yeah, I thank my dad, bless him, for the "you're not going to get there, you're a waste of time," all that sort of stuff. And at the time, it hurts, but these days, because people have said to me, they said, "Oh, what do you think would have been like if your dad was really supportive of you and got right behind you?" And the answer I give now is I don't know. What I do know is that him being against me trying to pursue a creative and artistic career path is what gave me the initial drive to do it. That I know. Everything else is just hypothetical. So, right. And while it's interesting to discuss, it's not, hypotheticals aren't something that I'm overly interested in getting too much into these days. So for those who don't know, Pete is a live international live sound guy and mixing engineer in his own right. And you've worked with the likes of David. You did David Bone's recent world tour. You've done you worked with David Bowie. You've also been doing stuff with Katy Perry, although you're not here in Australia. She's in Australia right now, I think, if I recall.
Yeah, I don't. I sort of signed off on that whole thing in 2017. Although I have done a couple of little bits and pieces since then. But that was my official goodbye to doing any touring with her, and I think sort of my goodbye to doing any of the real pop touring stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I got called to do one show with her in 2011, and 7 years later, I finally had to, end it.
Well,
she's actually a really wonderful lady to work with, and as far as being in the pop world, I think I could have done much worse. So
yeah,
grateful for that opportunity, actually.
So how did it all start for you, Pete? What was your career entry into audio?
Wow. Yeah, that's it goes way back. I mean, my family is pretty musical, although not so much anymore. But my dad was a music professor at the local or the Smith College is an Ivy League, as they call it, Ivy League college in Massachusetts, and he was a music professor there. He was also our church organist. And oops, sorry, what is going on here? He he was a real early influence, although he passed away when I was just after my 8th birthday.
Mm.
He was really, I think, probably genetics as much as anything else, but he really passed along a lot of the musical appreciation that I have. And everybody in my family played an instrument or sung or something.
Mhm.
And I was going to be a rock and roll drummer or maybe a keyboard player or something like that. Started smoking pot when I was about 11 years old, and my rehearsal and practice discipline went right out the window. And long about the end of high school, I realized that there was something else I might actually be halfway decent at. But I mean, between those times, I was, pulling people's stereos apart and hot rodding them, and just keeping my hands in like some sort of technical aspect of this. But I was given the opportunity pretty much right out of what would have been my last year of high school. Truth be told, I never finished. Um, and I was very fortunate to work with a guy. I was actually working in a stereo shop, and one of the owners of the place, decided that he wanted to set up a little recording studio in the basement of the shop. And we sort of begged, borrowed, and stole all the gear we could to put it together. Myself and one of my oldest friends, who I got a job at the stereo shop. He's also a multi-instrumentalist, and between the two of us, we kind of cobbled together this little recording studio, and bit by bit. So that was where things really started. And then a couple of months into it, one of the bands that we recorded approached me about doing live sound, and I completely bullshitted him and said, "Yeah, I know what I'm doing there." Destroyed him with feedback for about a week until I finally figured out what I was doing, and onwards and upwards from there.
I found what I find a lot of people. My first experience in audio at all was in live sound as a teenager, just helping the local sound guy just
Yeah,
bump in and bump out, and just sit there and just watch this guy. As a kid, looking at what was probably a Yamaha, I think it was an old Yamaha, was PMP. Oh shit, I forget the serial number, but it was what they used quite a lot back in the day. It was a standard sort of Yamaha live console, and to see
yeah,
all these buttons and just was mesmerized by how the heck did he know what the fuck to do with all these buttons, as most people do until you understand what how it works and the
right.
method and the whole method in the madness. But the one thing I've always given live sound engineers great respect for, particularly the ones that go on touring, is the ability to be able to. You've got very little time to get acclimatized to a room and to make things work and to troubleshoot, and because you half the time you're going blind, and yes, you got a support crew and people and equipment to help you, and machines to help you analyze the room, etc. But still, even so, there's a very short window to find the problems and get it to work.
Yeah, it is a vastly different arena or venue to work in than a studio, where you may not have all the time in the world, but you certainly have the ability to have a do-over if you need one. But live audio is a bit more like guerrilla tactics, and knowing how to troubleshoot something and get a show up and running as quickly as possible. Quite often, especially when it comes to doing festivals and stuff like that. So.
Yeah.
But I enjoy that aspect of it very much. I kind of welcome that challenge. And the one thing that I think one of the biggest bits of education I got out of it was, and it took me, I've been doing this is my 40th year. And it took me about 30 of those years to become more like kind of cool, calm, and collected in the face of abject terror,
Mm.
which happens on a far more frequent basis on the road than I care to admit sometimes. But yeah, there's plenty of shit to go wrong, and it quite often does.
How much thought do you think goes into acoustics when stadiums are built? Do you think that's a consideration, or it's more about aesthetic and layout and ergonomics, if you will, as opposed to?
I would say in the last probably decade, maybe 15 years, they are much more interested in getting sound treatment right, because most of these venues have become multi-purpose. You're not trying to shoehorn a production into an old velodrome somewhere I mean, there are a few of those places left, God bless them, but no, much more purpose-built venues now. The only problem is it's quite often you'll find that the people that the owners of these places, or what is ultimately the landlord, because they always come up with different sponsors. Every year you tour to these places, they have a different name on them.
Mm-hmm,
But the expense of acoustic treatment is a bit of a put off for some of these building owners and landlords. But even so, I mean, you get enough. They get enough complaints out of what turns out to be a bulk of their business throughout the year, which is touring shows, whether it be a theater show or most of even the big sporting events now have quite a sound element to them, and they want to sound good. So if you're in an echo in a big old barn of a place that's just got 4 seconds of reverb in it, and no one can really tell what's going on, enough complaints will come down the pike so that somebody will do something about it. So I'd say probably at least 2/3 of the places that I was going with Katy on tour. That's her and Bowie were the main arena tours I did. I did 9 Inch Nails for about 4 years, and we did some arenas as well. But it was Katy was the biggest arena tour, and I could probably count on one hand the amount of places we played arena-wise that I was just like, oh dear God, this is going to be a nightmare. And you just kind of have to. I equate these places to like flying planes, and a club is a fighter jet,
mm-hmm.
and an arena is more like a jumbo jet.
Yeah.
The little moves, which you notice so quickly in a club, raising a fader or changing an EQ, is a much more mushy affair when it comes to these big old rooms. And quite often you have to really make radical changes to hear any immediate difference. But,
are there any particular any venues or stadiums, clubs that you've always looked forward to going to, or were just like a nice comfortable fit, if you will?
One of my all-time favorite clubs is now gone, was CBGB in New York, and
Iconic.
Partly just because it was a shithole, but there was something very endearing about the place. The first time I ever worked there, they had this old Soundcraft 1S. It was this ancient console. It sounded really good. But I was doing line check for the band I was working for. I mean, it was a real bang bang kind of place. It quite often 6, 7, or 8 acts per night. Everybody gets 20 minutes. Mm. And as I'm pushing faders up, 2 cockroaches crawled out of the fader slot. And I said to the house guy, I'm like, excuse me. And he goes, God damn it. He got all pissed off. And he wasn't pissed off about the roaches. He said the cockroach shit is really corrosive, and he has to replace faders all the time whenever they find cockroaches living in there. I'm like, well, what about just the factor if you've got bugs crawling out of your console? I don't really care about that. It's just what they leave behind. But it was, I did so many really fun gigs there, and it was just a piece of history to be. I was very sort of proud to be a part of. As far as other venues, theater is like anywhere from about 1,500 up to about 4,000 seats. Those are my favorite types of venues, because you're still close enough to the artist to maintain some real intimacy. Mm. And the acoustics aren't so washy that your mix really translates. And but if I were to name a few, I'm trying to think. There's some. There's actually like the State Theater in Sydney. I've been there a bunch of times. Loading sucks, but it's actually, I enjoy working at the theater.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the one in Melbourne that we just did with David, and that was 2018. I cannot remember the name of it.
Palais Theatre.
Oh, wait, it was it's right near the it's at the end of the south, like,
Oh, the Art Center.
yeah, I think so. It's like on that south bank of the river.
The Art Center.
You walk, yeah, it's sort of at one end of that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of there's the Art Center and not Dance Brooks, so that's on East Melbourne. But I know you mean where the spire is, there's a big tall spire coming up.
Yeah, exactly. And then at the other end of the walk was probably one of my least favorite places. It's the casino.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah,
anyway.
I've you know what, gambling's never been my thing. That's why Vegas. I just don't get Vegas, man. And
no, I don't. No, to me, I've had plenty of vices throughout my life, and thank God gambling was never one of them.
I think gambling's one of the most insidious ones because look, if I was a cocaine freak for a better part of 25 years, and I haven't touched that stuff anymore. But taking a hit of coke or some acid, anything else that gives you some kind of experience. Now, I think gamblers would argue that, well, it's the rush, it's the anticipation, it's the adrenaline of maybe that's it. I don't know, but I never got it. But it's a bad one. I've seen a lot of people go down as a result. But anyway, casinos can.
Well, I share your opinion. I think that I dislike going to Vegas and Atlantic City and those places. I just don't find anything associated with that sort of activity that draws me in, It doesn't. It seems like a bit of a, I don't know. I don't want to say it's a sad existence. I know plenty of people that enjoy gambling that aren't addicted to it, but it's just not my thing.
It's not my jam. Yeah, totally. Now the other thing that people didn't realize, and in fact, I didn't know this until recently myself, that you mix Saturday Night Live as well.
Well, I mix Saturday Night Live for the artists that I've worked with. We just did it last night, as a matter of fact, with David Byrne. Yeah. And we had a really, really fun time. It's one of the few TV shows it's all the TV shows have become more enjoyable experiences over the years. They didn't used to be.
What changed? Yeah.
Just more of an emphasis on giving the artists and the whole music experience of a lot of these late night shows. They used to jam you in at the end of their production desks, and they give you, maybe 10 or 12 channels and have it go, do your best. And it's like, that doesn't fly, it doesn't work anymore. They've spent millions of dollars on the music department of SNL. Beautiful control room, beautiful console, great people that really get it and can dial you in pretty quickly. We had a really fun time. Myself and Jay Vicari, who's been Saturday Night Live's engineer for 35 years. We were doing more of what you and I are doing right now than we were doing mixing, because it was such second nature to myself and him both, to be there. I did work at Conan O'Brien was a show here on NBC for many years, and I was actually the monitor engineer there. For the house band and for all the guest bands. I don't find it to be I don't think I could do TV as a steady gig. I do enjoy going in now with whoever I'm working with if we get called onto a show. David got we did Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel and all these other, late night talk show host spots. And it's fun. But Saturday Night Live, they feature the musical artists. They give you 2 songs instead of 1. Ooh. And it's just, they really make a much bigger deal out of it. And the host, the guy last night was John Mulaney, and he and David Byrne are very good friends as well. So it was kind of, and Dave, they put David in skits, and it was kind of fun. So.
How'd you get into TV? How'd that all come about? Just your TV career?
I was, in 2005, I was about to, my my then wife and myself were about to have our son, and I decided that it would probably be a good idea to get off the road for a little while so I could be more of a stay-at-home dad, and well, stay-at-home dad that had a day job as opposed to a dad that was not home,
Yeah.
hence, or because of touring. But I talked to one of the local artists that I worked for from time to time. This amazing, believe it or not, Beatles cover band that I used to work for, and the guitarist Jimmy Vivino, who was in Conan's band, actually became the band leader, said, "Would you be interested in coming into the TV world?" And I said, "I don't know, would I?" and so he kind of put some stuff together for me, and it's just because it's a tough world to break into. You do kind of have to know someone, or you have to have a good long list of credentials. And I just didn't really ever consider doing it. I hadn't really thought about it as an option. I still love touring, believe it or not. Even coming, nearing 60, I see myself having a few good years left at least doing it. But this was a good opportunity to stay home and see what a different, avenue of the business was like. I have to say, it probably was not the best show for me to have. I didn't get the greatest impression about TV through that show, shall we say. And after about 2 years of that, Nine Inch Nails was going out on the road, and they asked me if I would be interested. And after having turned them down once, I got asked again, and that time I took the job.
That would have been amazing, because I've never seen Nine Inch Nails live. I'm only just watching DVDs and stuff, and the setup just looks like incredible. Because I mean, Trent's, from what I can gather, is super anal, super knows what he wants, and dare I say, I'm just guessing here, but a perfectionist of sorts.
He is. I got lucky. And it was not an artist that I had ever seen myself working with. It was a little heavier than stuff I was used to listening to and working with. And the recorded versions of things were, I liked some stuff that I heard, but I hadn't really delved into it very far when I got the call. And we met, and he told me that he had seen two artists in the prior couple of years. One was David Bowie and the other one was Radiohead. And he really liked the sound of both of those shows. And he actually they asked me to come out on the road, and I was working at NBC, and I said no. And so they hired the Radiohead's engineer, and he was only able to work for about 10 months, I guess, and then go back on the road with Radiohead, who he'd been with forever and still is with. And so I said, okay, I'll give it another shot. And I went out to see the band play live and kind of get a feel for what it was going to be like. And as soon as they hit the stage, I was like, oh yeah, I could definitely do this. And I talked with Trent a little bit, and the only thing he actually asked me about was if I was interested in using a digital console. Had I ever used one before? And I said yes. And he said, would you be interested in trying this particular one? And I said, sure, why not? It was an Avid. They were brand new at the time. And after that, he kind of left me alone. And I was shocked, because he was all over lighting and video and, that kind of thing. He was very visually involved, but he kind of let me do my thing with the audio. And I was very happy about that. I felt very honored that he, trusted me. But he very rarely ever came to me with anything other than, great job. And that made me very happy.
It's always nice.
Yeah, he did. I got called to the dressing room one night. I don't like headphones very much, so instead of headphones like a lot of guys use live, I keep a set of near-field monitors at the desk. Mm-hmm. And they had set up a little just a very rudimentary video set up right behind me, and used two live mics to record a show. They needed to show it to somebody. I forget what they were taping it for, what they were recording it for, videoing it for. But I got a call at the end of the night, right after the show. And when Trent calls you at the end of the night after the show, it's not usually a good indication. And so I should preface this by saying during the show, I if I needed to listen to something, it's not a quiet show, and I would solo something in the speakers, and it would come roaring out of the speakers so I could hear it above the PA. And so he calls me to the dressing room, and his assistant comes and says, Trent needs to see it. I'm like, oh boy, nah, something's really gone wrong. And I go into the dressing room, and he's got the whole thing set up. He's got a big TV screen and a big stereo and everything in the dressing room. And he goes, what the fuck is this? And he presses play, and the band's playing on stage, and you can hear what's a decent mix for a live mic'd video. And all of a sudden, it's guitar for days, like totally overtaking the mix. And I'm like, what the fuck happened? Did I miss something during the show? And all of a sudden it came to me, no, I soloed the guitarist right then, and the mics were right behind me. So I saw, and he's looking at me like daggers coming out of his eyes, like, how could you do this to me? And I said, hang on a second, Trent. I was like, I soloed the guitar right there. Remember, I've got speakers right in front of me. He goes, okay, see ya. I was like, oh, shit my pants, and then was fine. And it was all good.
Speaking of which, on a loud show, how have you been able to maintain or preserve your hearing over working at, situations like that?
You're really cheeky and say, what? Yeah, no, I do protect my hearing as best I can. If I was to tell you that I had, perfect hearing, I'd be lying through my teeth. I have, according to a few different audiologists, my hearing is in pretty good shape for a 58-year-old. But I do suffer with some tinnitus, and undoubtedly from the volume of several of the shows. Katy Perry was loud, Nine Inch Nails was loud, David Bowie was pretty loud. So that was about 15 years of relatively loud mixing.
Yeah, I find it hilarious how guys our age, just the ego of some guys who like to tell you that they can still hear 23,000 cycles, at minus 80 dB or something ridiculous. And it's, they're full of shit.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely. And it doesn't mean anything anyway.
Well,
it's like.
Well, exactly. Some of the.
Yeah.
Go on. No, you go ahead, Pete.
No, I was going to say you lose your hearing very gradually. And the typical diminishing areas are in the speech articulation, like 2, 3, and 4K. And if you look at any aging man or woman's hearing, that's where it starts to dip out and you lose your response. Partly because the tinnitus is masking it in those frequencies to a certain extent, but also it's just natural, diminishing, the degradation of human hearing happens for most people, starting some people as early as their 30s, and most people 30s and 40s and 50s. You begin to roll off a bit. But so what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that you become accustomed. You don't notice. It's not like somebody, clipped your hearing off overnight. But I get used to, and one of the ways I often check myself is I have a pretty extensive library of recordings that I'm very familiar with, that I've loved over the years. Most of them are from pre-1980, back when, analog was still king and people still recorded and mixed with dynamics. And so I'm very used to those pieces of music. And when I'm at all unsure about what I'm listening to, I'll quite often pop one of those things on, or several of them. And when it comes especially to working in live sound, it really allows me to hear detail and stuff in specific areas. But your high frequency hearing rolls off, and you just become accustomed to what you're hearing around you. And if something still if you're mixing something too bright, it is going to sound too bright in relation to what you're normally hearing. So it's basic. I think it's comparison based. As your hearing diminishes, you're still hearing life.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And I mix to that.
And I think people forget also that your brain has a way of just compensating. Your brain's an amazing thing, and it just seems to make up for it. I mean, I've known of guys who, not publicly known, but some incredible engineers who actually only have one working ear, and somehow they manage
Chris Thomas
to make it work.
Chris Thomas, great producer from, Pretenders to all kinds of artists. And yeah, one ear.
Chris Thomas.
Yeah.
No shit.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah.
How about that? Well, no one can argue with this stuff.
No. And it's, you know, as you well know, I just from talking with you, you know, audio and sound quality is important for sure. But in many ways, it's capturing the vibe of something. And even with mastering, you know, people can say, well, you know, I really like a little bit more air here or that there. It's like, did you get the essence of what was going on?
Correct.
You know? And I learned that a long time ago, probably around the time I got into recording. And I was a big fan of these sort of hi-fi bands, Genesis and you know, Roxy Music and stuff like that, and where the emphasis seemed to be as much on sound quality as songwriting, stuff like that. And then I got turned on to a band that most people in Australia will never have heard of called NRBQ. It stands for the New Rhythm and Blues Quartet, best bar band ever existed. And somebody gave me a record of theirs, and I'm like, this sounds like shit. Why do I keep playing it? I love it.
Yeah.
And I realized what I was hearing was the songs and the performance, you know, and the vibe, the spirit of what was going on underneath it all. And that really rocked my world. You know, that was one of the biggest turning points, I think, in my whole career. And it was one of the earliest things that happened to me. So,
yeah, I think there's a fine line. I think there's a point when it comes to sound quality where it's diminishing returns. You know, you get to a certain level, and then after that, it's you're working so hard for. I mean, each to their own. Some people are all about the minutiae, but like you, I think there's a point where that optimal point where it sounds good fidelity wise, but all that doesn't mean anything unless you've got a great performance, because that's the thing that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And I agree with you.
yeah.
Some old shitty recordings, but just have a performance that just a spine tingling will trump anything. That something like a Steely Dan, and I love Steely Dan. Steely Dan are great in small doses in my world. You know, that technically they're just they're perfect as anything, but I don't think they have the vibe of, you know, so the Rolling Stones. You know, so.
I gave you the exact two examples that I was just thinking of like Beggar's Banquet and, you know, Gaucho or something. It's like, you know, I mean, if you spend too much time, if you've got an artist who's willing to spend the time to get amazing sound quality, God bless you. You know, it's like that's great. But more often than not, it's like, I got to get the first take off of this dude or this gal, you know, because that's going to be the one. That's where the fucking balls are going to come from, you know? And it's like, and you got to be ready to go. Okay, it didn't sound as good as it might have on the third pass, but it lost its mojo somewhere in the process.
And sometimes people also don't back themselves. I think whether it's capturing a performance or even just pulling a mix, because they feel like it was done very quickly, but it just seemed to capture an essence. And one of the great stories I loved was seeing a documentary where Quincy Jones was talking about on the Thriller album, where they were waiting to get everything was in the can except for trying to choose a mix for Billie Jean, and they had something like about 60 reels of half-inch tape of various mixes that they'd done, and I think it was after they went through it. I think it was the second mix that they said that's the one. And the way they went, that's the one we're going with, and we finally got a single, and off they went. You know, we sometimes there's this tendency to think of we need to overwork something, because if we haven't, even from a professional point of view, if I don't look as if I've done hours of work or I've labored over it, the client may feel like they're not getting value for money, because it's more about the quantity of it as opposed to just the quality.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with you, and I think it's one of the things that I could go on for days about, sort of the benefits and the downsides of digital recording, the choices that can be made versus the choices that had to be made back when you were with a limited amount of tracks and, you know, trying to capture a performance, and sort of put some forethought into how it was going to sit in the mix and things like that. And these days, you know, you can fix almost anything, and you have, you know, I when I was working with Katy, this was a real eye opener. I'm going to sort of sidebar here for a second. when I started working with Katy, the first tour I did with her, I was handed, because, you know, like any good pop tour, there's backing tracks for all this stuff. And I was handed a drive full of backing tracks, and it was like, they were mastered, you know, they were just hammered and EQ'd to death. And it's like, they sound kind of cool on their own, I guess, but they're not going to mix well with a live band. And we wanted the live band, you know, we wanted it to sit right. And so the next tour, I said, look, I need access to the masters. I need to go and make this as homogenous a performance as I can. And that's going to mean not mastering these things and making them all hyped up sounding, because they need to sit in with the band. So I got access to masters, and I found out what the makings of pop music really
entails,
consisted of. Some of these songs had upward of 200 tracks. You know,
yeah.
I had a track, my favorite one, where there was 13 tracks for the hi-hat part.
What?
13 fucking tracks for a hi-hat. Yeah, because there was little teeny changes. And instead of just doing it on the fly on the same track, they were adding and subtracting. Pop music is all about subliminal, almost like subliminal messages. They don't do much of that, although there might be a little bit. But it's subliminal changes, because there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of similarity, but there isn't. If your ear gets drawn to something, it's probably because there's a small amount of change happening at the same time. I don't know how to shut this off. I'm very sorry.
No, it's okay, dude. All good.
But all these tracks that I was listening to, and so I was having to build backing tracks on my own, which is what I wanted to do. But when I realized what I'd bitten off, I was like, man, this is going to take a while. I had to sift through ridiculous amounts of tracks. But when I sort of saw how what it all consisted of, I was like, this is genius. Like, this is why these producers get paid the big bucks, because they create something that sounds, I won't say simple, but it sounds, the arrangements and stuff aren't quite the same as maybe the music you and I grew up with. But there's stuff going on just under the surface that made me go, holy shit, this is something more than I expected. And it gave me a new respect for that whole genre. I'm still not a big pop music fan, I wouldn't say, but there's a few things that catch my ear from time to time. You know, I grew up on a lot more of the 60s and 70s stuff.
Do you find you still can enjoy music as you did? I mean, obviously, it's hard not to get analytical sometimes, because you understand how it works and the machinations behind it all. But do you find that you can still listen to music just purely for the enjoyment of the song and the music?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, put on Jimi Hendrix and I'm lost, man. I'm gone. I love it. You know, there's any of that stuff. I grew up on Cream and Hendrix and the Beatles and the Stones and, you know, Dave Clark 5 and all these, you know, great artists of the day. And technically, what was going on was that these were being recorded to 4 and 8 track tape machines, and there was a lot of forethought going into it. Kind of hard to unpack all that stuff and see how they did it. So I don't bother trying to tear that stuff apart in my head. Occasionally I would put on a set of headphones and listen to something and go, man, that's, you know, how'd they pull that shit off? But no, quite, you know, 99% of the time I'm getting the vibe from it. And I find when I have a harder time going to live shows. And I listen to a live mix, I always hear, you know, you always hear what you do with it, you know. And I always try to say, remember, you're not the guy sitting at the mixing console. You don't know what he or she is dealing with.
But you know what's interesting though, when you go, if you go to a situation like that, I think when I look back on my career, I think the biggest lessons I ever learned, or the greatest things I'm grateful for, were the mistakes of others and seeing how not to do things. Like this studio, for example, is more about what I haven't done with it or what I didn't do, as opposed to the things I put in and done, you know, because I'd say, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I like this. I like that. I'm definitely not doing this. I'm not going to be running my show that way. And it's more about what I haven't added, and just by looking at others. So So same with engineers. Just watching engineers work, I learned, I think, more about how not to do things, or how not, in terms of dealing with people, or in terms of a workflow, or in terms of, starting time, finishing time, lifestyle decisions, that kind of stuff, so.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you. And I think that it's I think one of the main things I found was keeping it as simple as possible. Watching myself, first of all, back when I started working with Nine Inch Nails, and I had this big Avid console, and I was like, oh man, I can use all the plugins that I used to use in the recording studio. Now I can stick them in the console. So I was just jacking this thing up full of plugins. And at one point, I was like, I wonder if this is actually helping me. And it actually didn't really occur until I started working with Katy Perry. I had built her mix up to be very slick sounding for a live show, in my humble opinion. And we went to play the opening of the cricket season in Chennai, India.
Right.
And as you can imagine, sometimes, the technical aspects of playing a show in India can be a bit challenging. And I specified the console that I wanted to use, and it was another Avid console. And I said, I need to have at least 3 working DSP cards, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, okay, yes, I'm assured they'll be there. And I got there. It wasn't like, I had 3 cards and 1 was not working. So basically what I got to do was put all my channels in the console, and I had like a couple of reverbs and a delay, and I didn't have any inserts. I didn't have any stuff to play with at all compared to what I normally did. And I was like, damn, this sounds good. And I didn't need all that shit. And as a matter of fact, it's actually making it sound worse. So that was a big eye opener. And so I started kind of backing off, like trying to get all slick with all this processing and stuff. And it's, depending on the artist, some of the time, some artists, it's very helpful to have some of this processing. And actually with the current show, with David Byrne's show, because of the nature of the show, it's very advantageous to have a few bits and pieces around. But it is really simplicity and spending a little bit more time listening instead of another funny story. When Pro Tools had just come out, I was working at a studio up in Massachusetts called Longview Farm, which is sadly gone. But the chief engineer there, this guy Jesse, we had Pro Tools in there for about a week, and he kept coming in the control room and he'd go, "Hey boys, how's it looking?" And we're like, "Great, man." And finally, one of us, I can't remember, it wasn't me, somebody else that was working on the session, he goes, "You keep saying, how's it looking?" He goes, "Yeah, you guys keep fucking looking at the screen." He goes, "Shut that thing off." And I'm like,
yeah.
Wow.
It's how it is nowadays, man. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've lost our, well, not lost, but I think the Visual Alliance kind of is cool for maybe confirming certain things. I remember a great example of that was when George Augsburger was tuning my room. He came in, he had a laptop, and he had this James Taylor track that he always would play. It was it had the most thunderous bottom end for a folk artist, for a singer-songwriter type artist. But anyway, it was one song in particular. I got sick of it after about 17 plays, but nonetheless, that was his reference track. And he would just do everything listening to it. And I think he may have pulled out his laptop and microphone during the course of the day twice.
Yeah.
Maybe looked at his screen in total, 3 minutes in total for the day. And all the rest of it was just him just listening. And whatever he was able to hear was just, anything that he was just not quite certain about, just for confirmation. It was, I think, interestingly, because I'm not a neuroscientist by any stretch, but I do understand it's a bit like, CPU, like our senses. If we notice when we close our eyes and listen, I tend to close my eyes a lot when I'm working. And I find that when I shut my eyes, all of a sudden my brain has access to more of its CPU, if you will, to be able to listen. And
sure. Well, that makes perfect sense.
Sort of get into it a lot deeper. Tell me, as an American, did you get to see the cricket, or have you had any appreciation? You've been to Australia as well, but have you had a chance to look at it, or do you appreciate it, or have you just completely just for fuck this is
I
nonsense?
don't understand it. I got a little bit of a training, a little bit of an education by someone who's quite involved or knows it very well. Somebody I was on tour with. I've never been to a live cricket match. The thing that I was doing with Katy was the ceremony, the opening ceremony.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So it wasn't it wasn't a match or anything. Um, and I've seen it on television a few times, but just been like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. You know, I mean, I'm not a big sports fan. I do watch a few bits. I like hockey and I like
I
baseball.
love
Stuff,
hockey.
but,
Oh,
yeah,
hockey. Hockey's
okay.
just the best. I love that Mark Twain saying of, went to a hockey match and a hockey game and a boxing match broke out.
It is, and I because I'm not a fan of American football. I don't like, and I'm not a big fight fan because of the physical violence and the brain injuries and stuff. And yet I'm such a fucking hypocrite because I love hockey, you know. And it's like these guys are just as, if not more brutal than, you know.
Well, they are. They're tough guys, man.
It's such a fast game. I love it.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw a hockey game was Maple Leaf Gardens, watching the Maple Leafs, I think, play with I think it was with Chicago, and yeah, man, I couldn't see the puck for anything. It's just forget about it. And I mean, these big guys who are big, strong guys, skating 20 miles or 30 miles an hour, whatever they're doing, and these guys getting checked and getting hit. I mean, it's like getting hit by bloody cars. It's just nuts. And then you got enforcers. I watched a documentary on Netflix the other day about enforcers. You know, the fact that there are guys there specifically there just because they can duke it out.
Right.
You know, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. You know, watching the gloves come off and two guys going out. I don't know if you've ever seen it. The movie called Slapshot with Paul Newman.
Oh yeah. Oh geez, how good's that?
One of my all-time favorites, I have to say. Yeah.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So tell me about, listen, one thing, the reason we actually got to meet was through a gentleman called Andrew Watt.
Yeah.
Here in Australia. And you were working with an artist here called Anita Spring, and that's how we've come to work. And when Andrew was telling me about you, he was mentioning, this guy's worked with so-and-so and Andrew and Katy Perry and David Byrne of late. And then he started to tell me a little bit about the uniqueness of the live show and the fact that it was the first or the only show at the time that was purely wireless, or there was something unique about the sound setup that he said. Was it because it was just all wireless, or it was something or there was something about it that was particularly unique that I can't remember, but just tell us, there's something different about what you do there than.
Well, I mean, I cannot take sole responsibility for this. David came to me. I'd done a tour with him and a woman who calls herself St. Vincent, Annie Clark, and she's a wonderful guitarist and songwriter, singer. And the two of them collaborated on a record called Love This Giant. And the band that toured on that record was David and Annie, St. Vincent, a drummer and keyboard player, and 8 horns. And the horns were all wireless. So they all wandered around the stage and did whatever they were going to do. And it was all choreographed. And actually David moved around quite a bit too, because he was wearing a headset mic. But so I think from that idea, he decided that the next tour he was going to do, he hadn't told me about this until he approached me with it, was to have the entire stage completely bare. And I try not to, it's hard to put it visually into words, but the stage that we just got done running on Broadway, and actually was on, we used the same set on Saturday Night Live last night. Gray floor, aluminum chainmail curtain that went around 3 sides of the stage, so that both sides and the rear of the stage are hung with this like 30-foot tall curtain that's made just of aluminum chain. And they wear gray suits. All of them are in the same suit. David and the entire band are in these suits. And all the instruments, including the drums, are all wireless. They're mounted on these harnesses. The drums are, and during the normal show, when we're playing 20-odd songs, they can be quick changed and moved. You know, one drummer can put his drum down at the end of the song, grab another one, and come back out on stage for the next song with a whole different setup. But so 12 band members on stage, 6 of them are drummers, and then we have a keyboard player, guitarist, bass player. David plays guitar occasionally, and everybody sings. So we've got 12 headset vocal mics, 30-odd drums, about 8 channels of keyboards, 6 channels of guitars, and yeah, I think I covered it all. All wireless, entirely wireless, using a system that had never been used for this purpose before. It's a digital wireless system instead of being your old school analog wireless thing. Is Shure, the company Shure came out with a digital wireless system, which David came to me and said, "Can we do this? Here's what I'd like to do," which was what I've just described. Can we do this? And I blindly said yes. I was like, I'm going to make this work somehow. You know,
Wow.
That's how kind of how my career is ridden for the last 40 years. I won't go so far as to say lying, but probably stretching the truth or stretching my knowledge of the truth a little bit. And we were very, very lucky. The tour got put off a couple times because of scheduling and other projects. David's always got something else going on. And by the time it came time to actually start looking into prepping this tour, Shure had finally come out with this product. And sonically, it was the only way we could have done it. And given that there's about 70 little radio stations on stage, don't forget all these guys are all in in-ears too, which are all wireless. So there's like 70 odd radio stations up on stage. The bandwidth required for that, if we'd been using old school RF, wireless stuff, would have just been, there would have been no way to do it. So I got blessed with some luck and good timing, and then also was blessed with some very good people around me who knew a lot more about RF than I do.
Yeah.
Our monitor engineer and somebody else from the audio vendor that we used. And it all came together. We had about a month to prep it before we actually played our very first show. And it was such a different process than it was prepping for any other tour I've ever done. We had to think and rethink and trial and retrial and, just making choices based on completely other sets of guidelines than I'm used to,
Did you have any shaky moments at any stage when you took this on the road?
Not so much on the road. Once we had gotten out on the road, it was more about, I think, the band finding their feet to a certain extent. But during rehearsals, we came up against some serious technical challenges, which, with enough good minds on a problem, you usually
work it out.
And we had some fallback plans if things hadn't worked, but it would have been very limiting as opposed to what we were able to ultimately do. And what it created was, I'm so used to it. I've done 300 plus shows now with this thing, and I forget what I'm doing. And people go, "How the fuck are you pulling this off? Like, how is this working?" And I'm going, "I don't know. It's just what we do." It's like, and I've forgotten how much thought was put into it. We prepped from August of 2017 until the first day of rehearsals, which was February of 2018. So a good 5-6 months in there. And then we got into rehearsals and kind of started all over again,
Can I just put you on hold for 2 seconds? Just for 2 seconds, because speaking of technical glitches, I've got to get myself some extra power. You need this kind of stuff. This is the this is the this is the beauty of doing a live podcast. See, I'm not going to edit this shit out. You know, it's all warts and all here, my friend.
As it flies. No, I love that. You know,
it's all. You know, we're talking before about keeping it rough. You know, just the vibe. The vibe. It's just that's exactly how it went down.
Yeah, and going back to some earlier conversation, it was and like hearing a performance versus sound quality issue, and I remember hearing Gene Genie by Bowie, long before I ever worked with him, obviously, because it came out in the mid 70s, 74, I think.
74, I think, yeah.
Yeah, Diamond Dogs. And it goes to the change for the chorus, and the bass player doesn't change. And David goes, live, like it was being cut live. He goes, get back on it, and the bass player falls in, finally, but it took a bar. And I'm like, they just left that shit in there. And it was just like, okay, the concept alone was like, why would you leave that? And then every time I heard that song, I would listen for it, because I've found it intriguing and I loved it. And there's, God knows, any Stones recording you can find probably, I don't know how many mishaps when you're dealing with a bunch of guys like that.
Well, a great story that Mike Fraser, who, he's done records with, with Aerosmith and Metallica and, fucking everyone, was sharing the story that when he was up and, he was, quite becoming established as a producer. He was working on the Plant and Page record and, was left with these recordings, and he found this, the guitar section. He thought, this seems a bit loose. So he sort of got in here and started cleaning it up. And then Jimmy Page rolls in the next morning and hit play, and he goes, what the fuck happened to my guitars? He goes, I thought they needed a little tie. I said, no, fuck it. Just leave it the way it was. Just undo everything you just done. Even though it was just, it was not sloppy, but it just had a vibe. It just was loose, and it had a character. So, so that was a great lesson for Mike too. And I thought, he was trying to do his best. He was taking initiative because that was the way so many records were done. And yet he said, no, pull that shit off.
And I find at least that it's mostly the older artists that are a little more sticklers about leaving things the way they were. I've worked with some people recently that and I have a tendency to do the same thing, where I'll really it's rubbing me the wrong way. But if I give it a little bit of time and if I'm lucky enough to sleep on it and listen to it the next day, I'll realize, no, that's actually kind of cool. Mm. And that has a vibe to it that I didn't hear. All I heard was an imperfection at first. Mm. So I've one of my biggest life lessons is is trying to read my gut instincts. I think are quite often good. My first impressions aren't always the great. I have to learn not to always trust those, and because my default is to want to fix stuff, and because I can, and because I'm quick at it, and because it's impressive or whatever, it's my own fucking ego I'm trying to stroke here, but it's but being taught by the people who've come before me to maybe just leave that alone.
Yeah. Who are your mentors growing up? Were there in particular people that had a significant impact on you looking back?
A significant impact on me, in an early age, my brother, whose record collection I worshipped and his appreciation of music. And he's 10 years older than I, so he was really, the music I was hearing as a 5, 6, and 7-year-old, he was, in his teens, and it was the late 60s. But I guess going forward from there, gosh, that's a good question. I'm trying to, in a live sound department, there was a guy named Freddie Mueller who taught me how to do certain things in live sound. that I still use to this day. And like your friend Mr. Augsburger, I don't tend to use much analysis device, you know, those types of devices. I still use my ears, you know. And some people just are like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm doing this the way I was taught how.
Yeah.
And the way I trust the best for me. And I'm not against anybody using technology. Sometimes it's faster than my technique. But it's just something I do for my own self, you know, assuredness. I worked with a guitarist by the name of G.E. Smith, who did, you know, tons of records from Hall & Oates to he was a Saturday Night Live band leader for many, many years. He was out with Bob Dylan as Dylan's guitarist for quite a while. I wound up doing a bunch of records with him, and he was probably one of the biggest naysayers to my fixing. He's like, nope, leave that just the way it is. Don't fucking touch it. And I'm like, okay, man. And he could be a bit intimidating too. Big guy. And a motherfucker of a guitar player. You know, just amazing.
How good are those TV house bands, huh? Seriously. Like I remember as a kid and when I was in America during the 80s, I used to love watching David Letterman because the band, you know.
Yeah.
You know, Paul Schaefer and that crew, they were just one of the slickest bands, I think, to this day that I've ever heard. Extraordinary.
Now, wait, when did you, I didn't realize that you were in the States for a while.
Yeah, well, I spent a bit of time during the 80s, man. Toronto, Canada, a bit of time in New York. And because my 80s, I was nomadic. I just went around. I was a studio whore, and I landed back home in 1991. And I started my business then, man. It was a sound tools when it was Digizon sound tools on a coffee table in a flat, and that's how it started, man. Just from there, mainly editing. I mean, I started mainly editing because that, as you remember, was the format of the day, and so I was one of two guys in Melbourne that had one of them, and you know, people obviously, you know, started taking them on. But the main work I did back then was editing. So can you do a radio edit for us, or can you do an extended for us, or you know, here's a pile of DATs, can you compile them into and you know, the sequence of the album, and then that would go off. And so I thought, okay, I've got to get into this. I've got to, you know, I mean, because I'd experienced mastering beforehand. I said, look, I've got to get myself into this. So I started just getting analog gear and build it slowly. And it, you know, my whole career was, I refer to it as the hobby that got a malignancy. It just hasn't stopped.
Hey, I'm moving because my wife's just got home, and I'm going to move up to the studio. So I don't disturb her, and she doesn't disturb us. And I'm probably going to have to jump off pretty soon.
Same. We're getting. I try to keep these podcasts to roughly an hour and a bit, you know. Sure. But so we're near. But you can maybe give us a little bit of a look at the studio. Nice place.
Sure. Well, it is
nice place. Looks like you got a nice place there, buddy.
Thank you. I love it. And I'll briefly show you the studio. It is in horrible disarray because I'm just rewiring for 5.1.
Oh, okay. So is that where you mixed Anita's stuff?
That's where I've mixed pretty much everything for the last 10 years. And I'm wiring for 5.1 because of a little thing that we spoke about on the phone a few days ago, and that is
tell us about this upcoming project of yours. It's exciting.
I'm stoked, man. Spike Lee shot a movie of the David Byrne show that we were doing on Broadway, and lo and behold, they tapped me to mix the soundtrack for it.
Oh,
so
wow!
That was a huge windfall from being involved in that.
Is this going to be on Netflix, or is this going to be a cinema?
Could be a theater release. We're not really sure. I don't know what Spike got in the pipeline for this, but it certainly will be. Ultimately, will come out on Netflix and, you know, whatever those Amazon, you know, all that crap. But yeah, hold on one sec, Jeff.
Yeah. Something like that on IMAX would be mind blowing as well. Something like that on IMAX, you know, an IMAX screen.
Oh God!
You know, in a 5.1 situation would be mind-blowingly good. I still like going to the theater to watch a good movie.
Yeah, me too. We just actually went the other night to go see. I can't remember the name of the film. That's terrible. Me and my son and my wife. Yeah, The Photograph was the name of the film.
Well, what was that about? What was that about?
It was interesting.
it was about a photographer who it's a turn of events that I won't give it away, but you make the sort of the connection between all the members of the movie towards the very end of it. The cool thing was I counted the amount of or the people with white skin. There was might have been 2 of them in the film, and it was just like, holy crap! Like it was culturally and language wise and all kinds of stuff. I was like, this is such a cool experience. Like I forget what a white world I live in.
Yeah.
And especially where we live up here. It's, it's a beautiful area. I love it up here. It's close to New York City, but there ain't a whole lot of color up here. And it's, and I have taken issue with that. But it's a great flick. You'd probably really enjoy it. It's not action packed. It's not anything like that. It's just kind of deep. As far as like family ties and a certain amount of dysfunction in family, and which is something I can relate to.
Oh, can't we all? Can't we all? I think all of us can. And there's no perfection anywhere or in anything.
God, thank God.
Yeah, it'd be very boring otherwise.
It would be exactly.
So the photographer, I'll keep my eyes peeled.
I think the photograph.
All right, I'll keep my eyes peeled for it. All right, Pete, I'm going to let you go because we got to get out of here, and we got things to do, buddy. It was such a good chat. It was like I said,
thanks for this opportunity, man. I'm really glad we finally got a chance to got the opportunity to do it.
And we'll do it again. Any plans to come back to Australia at this stage in the foreseeable future?
Probably to move there.
Yeah.
If this idiot gets reelected. No, I don't know. Everything's, a lot of what I'm going to do over the next few years hinges on what happens in November of this year. Well, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the chips fall your way.
Thank you.
And
I'll be back down, whether it's for pleasure or for business. I don't know, but I love Australia, and I love especially Melbourne. It's probably my very favorite city in the world. So.
Yeah, we like it here too. Although it's going through its own changes that we're not too crazy about. Progress, quote unquote, as they say. But you've always got a home here, buddy. And we'd love to have you and lay some more hospitality on you. And thanks for being so gracious and for your time. And just again, it's always good hanging with you, buddy.
Likewise.
Thank you so much. We'll see you on the flip side.
All right. Cheers, Tony.
Thanks a lot, Pete. So there you go, Pete Keppler, live sound guide extraordinaire. And I want to thank our sponsors, Omega MMA Jiu-Jitsu, George Soteropoulos, UFC fighter extraordinaire and all-round legend, who he takes every class down there. So some schools have these teachers of high profile, and they usually just pop their head in every now and again. But George takes every single class, and that's whether you're doing MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, or wrestling. He is there. He's taking every class. He gives you lots of attention. It's a great club. We're a family-friendly club. We are a female-friendly club. It's a wonderful place to be. I love training down there. I get a lot out of it. So if you want to do something along those lines, just as some fitness, or you want to do something that's a little bit more, up there, it's the place to do it. Omega MMA, Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, all that kind of good stuff. 6 Down Street in Collingwood. Hopefully I'll see you guys down there training and getting a good sweat on. All right, I'm out of here. As always, say, please be nice to each other, but more importantly, be nice to yourselves. I love you fuckers. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you on the next podcast. And there you go, Pete. That's the end.
That is awesome, Tony. Thank you so much, man.
It's a pleasure, man. It's this podcast to me is it's a very self-indulgent thing, and a lot of it is it's about inspiring young kids into something, and we didn't get into that, but it doesn't always have to go there, because I don't want it. While that's the intention, it's not really. I don't want it to be contrived in that fashion. I just like having an organic conversation and connecting with the guest and just letting it go where it goes, and it doesn't have to. That's why I don't have a list of questions, and frankly, I don't even do too much research on my guests. I do a little bit, but in my mind, I try and pretend like, what if I bumped into you or one of my guests at an airport? We're in a layover, the planes are delayed, and we're just sitting there, and there's nothing else to do, so we just start talking to pass the time, and then all of a sudden, just things start to unfold, and also because particularly when it comes to the guests who have had any high profile success in the area, I don't want to necessarily just talk about that stuff, because it's the shit they get asked about all the time, you know?
Right.
So, and when I spoke to Mike was really appreciative of that. The fact that it wasn't just about, well, tell us what happened when Steve Tyler fucking got pissed off at, so-and-so, and what happened when so-and-so racked so much coke off her tits and whatever. I don't know. I'm not into the salacious side of things. I'm interested in the person. I like to get, like I'm talking to Pete Keppler, not the fact that you do the work you do is just, it's interesting, and we bonded through a career thing. But when I got talking to, it's like, I like this dude for being the dude he is. So we're obviously got similar values and similar points of view on life. And so we started.
I think we've had similar trajectories over the past as well.
Yeah, most definitely. And so, well, from a listener's point of view, I'm sure that people say, why didn't you ask you more about this? And why didn't you ask me more about that? And it's like, well,
make your own podcast.
well, that's true too. And dare I say, if he does get interviewed, it's the typical fucking same old. And, you need a little bit of that for interest, but there's a lot more. I find people more interesting than their character as opposed to their reputation, if that makes sense. That's it. Anyway. All right. Big love, man. You're awesome.
Yeah. You too, Tony.
Thank you so much. I'll, now that I got your number, I'm the guy that every now and again just drops a random text on, because one of the things, very quickly, I read a blog that was called The 5 Top Regrets of the Dying. And one of them was, I regret the fact that I didn't keep in contact with my friends. And so I'm the guy that will always just send the odd message out to let you know, hey, I'm thinking of you, buddy. How's it going? You don't necessarily, you don't have to call back. You don't have to respond in kind, but I just do that because I love, as I get older, I value my relationships more, and with good people. And I consider you one of the good guys.
Thanks, man. That's huge to me. That's huge. And I have to say, I probably, I think of people. I don't always reach out to them when I think of them, and so I hope this will inspire me a little bit more. We're both getting older.
Yeah, man.
It's like,
I'm enjoying getting older because I'm appreciating the fact that I have less time, which means it's more valuable. I'm going to use it more wisely, and because when I'm on my deathbed, man, I want to remember the great conversation I had with Pete, or the laugh I had with Pete, or the time that Pete and I talked about something that was a bit more serious, but we worked out the world's problems in 15 minutes. So anyway, you take care, big guy. All the best.
All right. You too.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. You take care of yourself, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. See you, Tony.
Okay,
Bye.
bro. Bye-bye.